Welcome to the Emerald City Sportscast.
Wilson, good as he throws, deep downfield. It's going to be caught by Metcalf for the touchdown.
Hosted by longtime Northwest sports journalist Dan Viennes.
Here's the drive, deep to left. He has done it again. Wow. Kyle Lewis, 3 games, 3 home runs. Mariners have a 5-2 lead.
Brought to you by Hollywood and Vines Recording Studio. World-class audio recording right in the heart of the Woodinville Winery District.
Wide receivers to either side. Russell takes the snap, drops back. He's going to throw down the middle. He's got a man. The ball is caught.
Game over, baby.
Touchdown. The game is over. The Seahawks are going back to the Super Bowl.
And now, broadcasting live from the Dan Cave Studios, here's your host, Dan Viennes.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Emerald City Sportscast. Not at 10 a.m. Pacific time anymore. Not part of the 365 Sportscast Network. Love those guys. Really appreciate everything they did and the partnership we had. And I have an open invitation to go back if it ever works for me again. But I like to be able to do this, to do the live stream, to do it whenever my schedule allows and whenever news warrants it. So if you're checking me out on the YouTube channel, please hit subscribe and also like it. That helps visibility for the channel. If you're watching me on Facebook, hello, you can comment, and I can read your comments here and post them in the window as well as Twitter. So let's get to some business, shall we? We've got some headlines to get to.
Ladies and gentlemen, can I please have your attention? I've just been handed an urgent and horrifying news story, and I need all of you to stop what you're doing and listen.
And now, here's today's headlines, brought to you by FreeBets, the newest online sports betting comparison site. Check them out at freebets.us.
The Mariners kick off their first road trip of the season today in Minnesota. Depending on when you're listening to this, it's either about to start or maybe you're watching the game right now, listening to this at the same time, or maybe you've already watched the game. So the big news, though, still, however, waiting for the results on the MRI for Mariners starting pitcher James Paxton. But Mariners general manager Jerry Dipoto said in his weekly radio show this morning they are, quote, not optimistic about the prognosis. Paxton left Tuesday's start against the White Sox after just 24 pitches with a left forearm injury. He said it didn't feel as bad as the flexor strain that kept him out for an extended period last year with the Yankees. But there was still this from Dipoto this morning on his radio show. He says, again, I quote, our expectation is this is not going to be a short stint on the injured list. We're just fingers crossed it's not anything long term. Dipoto said they expect to know much more within the next 48 hours. For the record, Scott Service yesterday said he doesn't think it's going to be a season-ending injury or anything requiring major surgery for Paxton, but we will wait and see. Other injury updates for the Mariners coming from Dipoto this morning. He says first baseman Evan White is day-to-day with the quad injury that knocked him out of the game yesterday. And 2020 Rookie of the Year Kyle Lewis is progressing well from a bruised knee and should make his debut next weekend when the Mariners return home to open a 3-game series against Houston at T-Mobile Park. A quiet week for the Seahawks, but they appear to be searching for more veteran depth at offensive guard. The team is considering bringing back Chance Warmack again, who opted out last year after signing with Seattle. Then he was released in January. Seattle has also had a visit with Cody Wickman, a former 6th-round pick of the Rams who started 18 games over his first 2 seasons, but has strictly been a backup since then, mostly in Dallas. So it appears that they're trying to lock down the guard position with vets, maybe so they can focus on center in the draft. We're going to talk about that a little bit later in the show. And it now appears that the expectation is that the 2021 Russell Wilson trade report cycle may be coming to an end or may have come to an end. Multiple reports this week opine that the Wilson and head coach Pete Carroll relationship is better, maybe better than it's ever been, according to one source. They're on the same page now, apparently, and that Wilson isn't going anywhere, at least not this offseason. Former Seahawk receiver Brandon Marshall saying yesterday on his television show that he has knowledge that that is the case And newly re-signed defensive end Carlos Dunlap told the press on Tuesday that he received assurances before he signed his new 2-year contract that Wilson would indeed be staying put. Don't listen to what Warren Moon says. Got a lot of headlines yesterday for saying he thinks it's going to end in divorce. Warren Moon is not really connected to the organization anymore. That was just his opinion, and I don't think it's a very informed one. So, for now, on this show, that'll put an end to the speculation. I know we've talked about it a lot here, me and other guests I've had on. You won't hear any more mock trades or hypothetical scenarios from me unless anything significant changes. Here are my thoughts on this, though. There are a lot of you out there right now who are saying, see, I told you so. This was never anything to worry about. You're wrong if that's the stance you take. It is completely plausible that this thing went off the rails, that it was in jeopardy. By this, I mean the relationship between Wilson, Carroll, the organization, it was in jeopardy of ending, that the Seahawks considered scenarios that would involve trading Wilson, but that now everything's been worked out. Everyone's on the same page. They're moving forward harmoniously, and it's dead in the water. Those two things can be true, and I believe they are. Okay, there was too much reporting, as I've said on the show before. Too much reporting from too many sources, good, legitimate sources, professional reporters that have really good connections. Do this for a living and do it well for a living. This wasn't just a rumor started by one guy. This wasn't Colin Cowherd 3 years ago with the Giants rumor. That was one source. This was coming from everywhere, and there was a lot of truth to it. But it appears that everything's cool now. So, even up until these reports the last couple of days, I thought, if the right things, if certain things fell a certain way on draft day, something could still happen. I'm now 100% convinced that the team is looking to move forward with Russell Wilson. And so now we got to focus on the roster at hand, because it's a lot better now than it was a month ago. I think that's one of the reasons Wilson's happy. But there's still a couple holes to fill, still a couple moves to make. We're going to talk about that. And I'm going to give you two different versions of a 7-round mock draft today with no trades. No trading down, just the 3 picks. 56, 129, and 250. That's it. Just to give you an idea what that might look like if the Seahawks are unable to find trade partners, or if there's a player that they don't want to risk losing by trading down from 56. So we'll take a look at that after the break. We're going to talk some Mariners first. Let's take care of some business. You're listening to and watching the Emerald City Sportscast. Looking for a place of inspiration to record your next musical or vocal project? Why not do it in the middle of wine country? Hollywood and Vines Recording Studio is a 4-room boutique recording studio in the heart of Woodinville Tourist District on Hollywood Hill. Within walking distance of over 100 different wine, beer, and spirit tasting rooms, this peaceful setting offers a respite from the rat race of everything around it. The studio features 14-foot ceilings throughout and a large main tracking room, along with separate isolation rooms for drum tracking and vocals. Featuring a talented crew of freelance engineers and an impressive array of industry-leading equipment, my friends at Hollywood and Vine Studios can assist with your audio tracking, mixing, and mastering pursuits. To find out more or to book a session, email Kevin at hollywood-vines.com, call 206-235-8125, or visit hollywood-vines.com. All right, welcome back, everybody. So we are into it. We're a week into the Major League Baseball season. Seattle Mariners have played 6 games. They open up their first road trip today in Minnesota. As I'm speaking to you live, that game is about to begin in about 25 minutes. Overall impressions. First time through the rotation. Mariners with the 6-man rotation, only team in baseball employing that at this moment. And they're 3-3. They're 500. So we love to talk about sample size when it comes to baseball. But we also love to make snap judgments. And I'll try to do both for you today. Again, if you're watching on YouTube or Facebook, You can go ahead and comment. I can see the comments here. I can put them up on the show. If you're on the YouTube channel, please hit subscribe. So the Mariners are 3-3 through 6 games. A couple of comeback victories, including opening night in 10 innings after I went to bed, by the way. And then yesterday, coming back to win 8-4 on the strength of a 7-run inning. As a team, the Mariners are batting .207. That's 14th out of 15 teams in the American League. Pitching-wise, their team ERA is 4.91. That's 11th out of 15. The offense has struggled. If you look at the rest of the American League West, the Mariners are off to the worst start of those teams. Oakland's struggling too, but the Astros hitting .295 as a team. They lead the American League with 12 home runs. Rangers sitting .262. The Angels .254. The offensive lineup just looks like spare parts right now. There's no continuity. Guys are hitting out of order. Part of that's due to injuries. We know that, right? Kyle Lewis being out really had a trickle-down effect on the lineup. When you look at yesterday's lineup, especially after Evan White left and Jose Marmoleos had to come out, was hitting cleanup. Well, today he's hitting cleanup in the lineup from the get-go for Evan White. And you had Dylan Moore, Sam Haggerty in the lineup at the same time. It looks patchwork. Looks like the kind of lineup at the end of the year when you have a bunch of injuries and going through a rebuild. Don't want to call your young guys up, right? They're getting nothing from the catching spot yet. Tom Murphy and Luis Torrens have struggled. Taylor Trammell looks overmatched. Now, I'll say this, and I haven't really heard a lot of this, and I think that's encouraging. Haven't heard a lot of, it was a mistake to call Trammell up. Too young, never played at AAA. He earned the job outright. And if there's one thing that I think the Mariners really put a lot of emphasis on, and I think they're very good at, although it hasn't exactly translated to tangible results, but they spend a lot of time on the mental aspects of the game with their young players. And if they thought Taylor Trammell wasn't ready mentally, emotionally, psychologically to struggle at the major league level, they wouldn't have given him the job on opening day. But he looks overmatched. He struck out, I think, 12 times. Had a big hit yesterday in that 7-run inning. Maybe that'll get him going a little bit. Certainly looked good in the spring, but he looks like a guy who's kind of treading water right now. Evan White was struggling again, 12 strikeouts. Still, same stories last year. When he makes contact, his exit velocities are among the tops in the league. Hits the ball hard. Just not making enough consistent, good, solid contact. But the fact that he was having to hit cleanup really kind of tells you everything you need to know about this lineup. Haniger, France, Seager, right? Mitch Haniger looks great. He's healthy. Looks like the Mitch Haniger that we remember from before the injuries. And that's great. It's fun to see. Ty France, every day he goes out there, he just continues to prove over and over and over again that he might have been the steal of that trade. He's a legitimate professional hitter. And then Kyle Seager, I don't want to say reborn. We know how he struggled in 2018, put some things together, changed his body, changed his approach. He looks like a guy that just in his mid-30s now could play till he's 40 years old. And more, and I've talked about this here, and how it equates to WAR and the value even that the dollar value brings. Every day that goes by, I'm more and more convinced that Kyle Seager should be back next year with the Mariners on that $15 million team option. It's been assumed for a long time, and then Kevin Mather came out and said it before he was forced to resign, that this is Seager's last year in Seattle. I hope that's not the case. We're not sure if Ty France can play every day at third base, and I'm not so sure that Ty France isn't better at second base on an everyday basis. And that Dylan Moore becomes kind of your Mark McLemore, your super sub who can play all four infield positions, really, if he had to. He can play first, I'm sure. And he can play in the outfield. And he gives you solid defense at all those spots. I think that's his best spot. I'm not convinced yet Dylan Moore can be a productive everyday second baseman. Ty France can. He looks really comfortable over there. He's played more games at second than at third in his big league career. Not in the minors, in the big leagues. But Haniger, France, Seager being your 1, 2, 3 hitters, not exactly the kind of speed and athleticism you want at the top of the lineup, first of all. Second of all, that should be your 3, 4, 5. And that's really where the Mariners are struggling to consistently string runs together, I think. Because they don't really have, and I know that the mold and the stereotype or the, what we think the leadoff hitter should be has changed. It's not necessarily the guy that's going to steal a bunch of bags and high on base percentage, get on base and run. But Mitch Haniger is also not it. And you'd rather have him hitting a little bit farther down in the order. The fact that J.P. Crawford failed to grab that position and really seems to have regressed at the plate is disappointing. As I look in the minor leagues, I'm not so sure they have that guy coming either. Maybe Jared Kelenic is a guy that would make some sense in the leadoff spot at some point because he's such a good hitter and he can run better than those guys. Now, you can say, well, having those three guys together, it's like having the heart of your order and you're getting them an extra at bat by moving them up in the order. Maybe. We'll see. But the drop-off after those three is pretty significant. And that's because Kyle Lewis is out. I think if you had him in the cleanup spot, that would make a big difference. Right? Something's going to have to give by June. Love how scrappy this bunch is. Love the fight. Love the at-bats. Mike Blowers made a great point yesterday that they're really not, even when they're striking out, they're not swinging at pitches out of the strike zone. They're not swinging at pitches they can't handle. The at-bats are good. That's promising. It's been an emphasis of the organization. You can see it working. And so that would lead you to believe that they're going to progress to the mean, I guess it would be, if you're trying to improve your results. The at-bats are good. They fight back. Only 2 home runs so far. We knew this would, without Lewis in the lineup, this wasn't going to be a very powerful lineup, but that's awfully low. The Mariners, and I said that something's going to have to give by June. If it doesn't improve, we need to see 2 things this first half of the season, I think. This is what I want to see. Well, 3 maybe, because we still, game in, game out, got my eye on Evan White. At some point, he's going to have to prove he can be a productive, everyday hitter at the major league level. And it's way too early to try and make any major judgments on that because he never played AAA. And he only had 60 games at the big league level last year. So we'll give that one time. I would just rather see him not having to hit 4th, drop him down the lineup, take a little pressure off. But we're going to need to see Kyle Lewis come back, and we're going to need to see that Kyle Lewis takes a step forward too. That he doesn't regress, that 2020 wasn't a fluke. Small sample size. He did struggle at the end of the year. And then we're going to need to see Kelenic. At some point, I said it in the season preview. To me, that's going to be kind of the flashpoint of the season. Is we got to see this kid. You talk about someone who's mentally ready. The makeup is off the charts from all indications. Everyone will tell you, this guy's ready. Even if he goes 0 for 20, it's going to be fine. And he'll find a way to make contributions on the field every day, on the base paths, defensively, grinding out an at-bat. And his personality, I think, is that infectious type. I've compared him to Jay Buhner when he came over from the Yankees. That he can affect that clubhouse. A little bit of a mild-mannered clubhouse at this point, it would appear. So we need to see those things. The rotation's going to be fine. Nobody was outstanding their first time through. Kikuchi's stuff was off the charts. Really encouraging start from Kikuchi. Can't wait to see what he does tomorrow. Need to see Marco Gonzalez bounce back today. But that just looked like a guy who hadn't found his command yet. Still kind of grinded through. And he'll be fine. Major concerns about Justice Sheffield and Justin Dunn. Less so about Sheffield. because we've seen this. We saw it last year. We've seen it in his career. Similar to what Gonzalez had in that first game, where he struggles a little bit to dial things in. And then when he does, when he really gets a feel for that slider and commands the fastball, he can be outstanding. But Justin Dunn now, I mean, last year we saw essentially a 1-to-1 walk to strikeout ratio. And then yesterday, the stuff looked better. We were all expecting the stuff to look better, right? The whole pregame show was about Justin Dunn getting in shape, getting his velocity back to where it was when he was drafted. Last year, he was 91, 92. He was 95, 96 yesterday. And the breaking stuff was better. But it's going to take him a while, apparently, to learn how to harness that. Because even last year, with the stuff he had last year, walked a lot of guys. Somebody, can't remember who it was in the pregame show yesterday, said, well, he should have more confidence in that fastball now that he's got his velocity back so he can be more aggressive in the strike zone and attack hitters. I don't know. I kind of think what makes sense to me is the analogy would be, the kid who's a sharpshooter from 3 in high school, and then he grows 5 inches in the summer and comes back. He's got to kind of relearn how to shoot, right? He's got to learn his new stuff, I suppose, get comfortable with it. I have some real questions, though, about his feel for pitching. And people have said, well, eventually he'll just end up in the bullpen, especially with the spike in velocity. I mean, you got to have some command in the bullpen, too. You can eliminate a pitch. You can focus on what you do well. You can hide your weaknesses a little bit better. But, again, way too early. Limited sample size last year. Never pitched above AA. We need to see him grow. We need to see him learn from this. The fact that he walked 8 batters and didn't give up more runs than he did, kept the team in the game, gave him a chance to come back with a big inning and win, that does say something. Says something. I thought Chris Flexen looked really good. They just had him on a short leash. Looked like a pro. Really looked like he had a plan. So second time through, obviously they're not going to have Paxton, so Margavicius goes back into the rotation. It was between he and Justin Dunn there at the end. So another lefty for a lefty. So we still have the 4 lefties in the rotation. LJ Newsome comes up to join the bullpen. It'd be interesting to know, and I haven't seen anything, and we really don't know because there's no minor league games. There's no Where's Logan Gilbert? Where is he in his progress? How are they ramping him up to get him ready to throw major league innings? How close do they think he is? And if Dunn continues to struggle, for instance, I could see a scenario where once the minor league season is announced and gets started, Dunn gets sent back down to work on his stuff down there in Tacoma. So certainly the eyes on the rotation, also the lineup as well. Lewis needs to come back next weekend. And we need to see Kelenic soon. I suspect now, after watching the first week, that maybe the Mariners were hurt by the pandemic more than any other team in Major League Baseball because of where they expected to be in their rebuild last year and where they expected that to lead them into 2021. And so now essentially I think 2021 is where they thought they were going to be in 2020. I call it develop and determine. They're developing players and they're trying to determine what they have. Last year was supposed to be the year we were going to see Logan Gilbert and Jared Kelenic. We never got to. They didn't get that developmental time. So now we're going to see it this year. And it's not like they're going to call those guys up. The team's going to go on a run, make a playoff run. It's not going to happen that way. So this season is going to be about developing and determining. And that's what we're going to talk about on the show as the season goes along. Where are guys at individually and as a whole? What are they going to look like by the end of the season? And then what type of action will be called for in the off season to fill in holes? Because if you're talking right now, if this was game 60 instead of 6 and the results were what they are, Whereas I think the idea over the last few years has been, okay, at some point, they're going to have to go out and they're going to have to acquire a frontline starting pitcher or two. Now you look at all the depth they have in their organization with the college arms they've drafted high, and you look at the performance on the field and you look at where are their strengths and weaknesses. And I know they got Rodriguez coming and Kelnick and Deloach, all those outfielders, Marte, and some other guys in the infield. But they're not going to be ready for a while. They need bats. And if the season were ending today and things are where they are or were where they are, certainly I think we would all agree that they would be looking for bats in the free agent market. Let's talk some football. When I come back, I'll give you a couple of different Seahawks mock drafts, what it might look like if they simply stay put and only use 3 of their current draft picks. Thank you for listening to the Emerald City Sportscast. I am Dan Viennes. Online gamers, have you checked out PSX Extreme? If not, you're missing out. PSX Extreme is a cutting-edge gaming website providing you with everything you need to know about the latest and greatest games. You'll find up-to-the-minute news about the gaming industry, as well as in-depth reviews of all the coolest games. The writing staff at PSX Extreme will also keep you informed on all the rumors about new games in development and impending releases. So if you can put down the controller just for a second, do yourself a favor and check out psxextreme.com.
You're listening to the Emerald City Sportscast, presented by Hollywood and Vines Recording Studio. And now, here's Dan.
All right, you guys, welcome back. Again, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, if you want to comment, I can read those comments. If you want to ask a question, I can post them on the screen and address them live. Let's talk some Seahawk football as the draft now is just 3 weeks away. And it's going to be a draft unlike any other draft we've ever seen under Pete Carroll and John Schneider. Usually this is about the time when we start doing crazy mock drafts because the Seahawks have 5, 6, 7, 8 picks, and we know they're going to turn that into 11, right? The way Schneider likes to move around the draft board. Different story this year. Just 3 picks in the draft, 2nd, 4th, and a 7th. It's pick number 56, pick 129, and pick 250. The prevailing thought is that Schneider will look to trade down from 56. If you look at the trade charts, you can maybe add a late 4th, add some picks later on to get some value. A lot of unknowns about this draft, but there also seems to be a lot of depth at certain positions. And that lines up with what the Seahawks' needs are, and it may explain their approach in free agency. What have we seen them do? We've seen them improve the offensive line with the trade for Gabe Jackson. We've seen them hold serve basically at center by bringing back Ethan Posick and Kyle Fuller. We've seen them fortify the defensive line in a way we haven't seen in an offseason since they signed Michael Bennett and Cliff Averill days apart. I mean, they're going to hit the ground running with that front 7 next year. I still suspect KJ Wright will come back. There's a report this week. He and Dallas were talking. He was looking at Dallas, called it a dream scenario. That's not going to happen, reportedly. The Seahawks now have somewhere between $4 and $7 million in cap space because of their maneuverings and the Tyler Lockett restructure, and the new Gabe Jackson contract, and some things they've done. Some of that needs to be withheld for draft picks and free agent signings. So front 7 looks good. Secondary. So 2 biggest needs remaining. I think we can mostly agree. Some people think wide receiver is a huge need. I don't think so. We're going to talk about that next week. I think it's center and it's corner. Now, while I say that, I think Akella Witherspoon was a really great value signing. He was a guy the Seahawks loved in the draft the year he came out. He was taken 20 picks before they ended up taking Shaquille Griffin. There's a thought that they would have taken Witherspoon if he was on the board. He's the prototypical long Seahawks corner that just hasn't stayed healthy. He played in the same system with Robert Saleh down in San Francisco, so the learning curve's not going to be very steep. If he stays healthy, he could be an ideal complement to J.R. Reed or DJ Reed. But not a lot of depth there, right? Trey Flowers took some steps forward last year, still questionable about his man cover skills. Quentin Dunbar got away this week. Signed with Detroit instead of Seattle after there were signs last week, some comments he made on Facebook that he was talking to Seattle. They want him back. Things look to be going well. And then he had 2 visits lined up, Detroit and another one. I think it might have been Kansas City. Canceled that one, signed with Detroit. Okay, they must have paid him. No, they gave him the veteran minimum. So I don't know if it was that he sees a clearer path to be the starter there or what it was that led Seattle to choose to pass on Dunbar at the vet minimum. Not sure. But they need someone there. And they could be eyeing this draft because this draft is rich in long Seahawks corners. And the standards are, in case you're just catching up, they like 32-inch arms. They love 33-inch arms, but they like no less than a 32-inch arm length and 77-inch wingspan. You can have less than 32-inch arms and have greater than a 77-inch wingspan. Now, the meteoric rise to the starting spot of Reed last year literally changed Pete Carroll's view of, the specs that they've used to evaluate corners. He even said so. He said, maybe we have to rethink that. The way we go about acquiring cornerbacks. They can play, they can play. If a guy can cover, he can cover. It's basically what he said about Reed. And the results were pretty indisputable on the field. But I still think they prefer that prototype, especially with Reed on the field. I think that's why they brought a guy like Witherspoon in, because then you got to have someone that can match up against the bigger receivers. And then in the slot, they have Amadi, some other options there. So Schneider may be looking to the draft. There's talk of a Richard Sherman reunion. There's some other veteran cornerbacks out there, Drake Kirkpatrick and Casey Hayward. I don't think they fit. And then you get into the whole technique thing, the step kick technique that Carroll teaches. Very difficult. They haven't had a great track record bringing veterans in from other systems and teaching them that technique. So you look to the draft. Last year, not a great draft for long corners. This year, really deep. And it's layered kind of all the way through it too, with intriguing talents at each sort of stage of the draft. But don't forget also, I want to mention this before we get into these mock drafts. Don't forget about Jordan Miller. Who's Jordan Miller? Husky fans will remember Jordan Miller, right? 4-year cornerback with the Huskies, played in every game as a true freshman, played in 13 games as a true sophomore, played in 46 games in his career, 18 passes defensed, 6 interceptions, always played second or third fiddle there. Played some slot, played some outside, but he always played alongside guys like Sidney Jones and Kevin King, who were both drafted in the same draft year, Byron Murphy, right? Long arms, he's 6'1", 186, slight build, explosive athlete. The scouting report on him coming out of UW was better in zone than press right now, needs to add a little weight and get stronger, a little tentative in the run game. That doesn't really fit the Seahawks mold. Miller was drafted in the 5th round by Atlanta, 2019. Played in 10 games as a rookie. Then he had some leg injuries. Seattle signed him, put him on their practice squad late last year, signed him to a futures deal. They may like Jordan Miller. He's a guy that we talked about in mock drafts in 2019 a lot in those later rounds as being a match for the Seahawks. So he's a possibility. And then they could be, as I said, eyeing this draft. So let's look at this. What if John Schneider burns up the phones and nobody wants to trade up to 56? There's so many unknowns in this draft, so many risks, guys that didn't play or opted out or didn't play as many games because of cancellations. So maybe this year teams are going to be more reluctant to give up draft capital to move up, thinking, let's draft as many guys as we can get our hands on, because some of them just might not make it, or our evaluations may not be as reliable as they've been in the past. So I did a couple of, if you're watching live, let's do a little screen share here, shall we? Let's go here. We'll start off. I used 2 different draft simulators so that I could get 2 different big boards, right? Start with the Pro Football Network mock draft simulator. And this is what I came up with. And it seems like as I've done these mock drafts, even when I trade down a little bit, going center first always works better than going corner first, in my opinion. When you go corner first, the difference between the corners that are available at 56 and 129 aren't as significant as the difference in the quality of the center prospect you're going to get. You may get a Trey Hill at 129, center out of Georgia, but not always. You're down to the guys like Drake Jackson, Drew Dahlman, who are smaller Joey Hunt type centers. Don't think that's what the Seahawks are looking for. So in both of these, I went center first. And in both of them, Josh Myers and Quinn Miners, a guy who's been talked about a lot with the Seahawks. Rob Staten talked about him on the show here. The Wisconsin Whitewater kid who blew up the Senior Bowl and is being moved to center. But he's rocketing up draft boards and usually isn't available when I do mock drafts at 56. But in both these scenarios, he was. But I went Josh Myers out of Ohio State. When I was on the Seahawks Playbook podcast with Keith Myers and Bill Alvstad, Keith brought up Josh Myers and compared him to Max Unger. And I went and watched some tape. It's a fair comparison. He's a really experienced, good, all-around center. He's not an elite athlete. He's not an elite mauler. He's not an elite mover, but he's really good in all those areas. And he's a guy that looks experienced enough that he could play as a rookie. So I went Josh Myers, center, Ohio State at 56. And then at 129, I've talked about him on the show before. I mock him to the Seahawks a lot. Another Huskies corner that Jordan Miller played with, Keith Taylor. Now, Keith Taylor would fit the mold of Carroll saying maybe he's a little more open-minded to a different type now. Falls a little bit short of the 32-inch arms. I think he's about 31 and a half. 6'1", long. But he was so good the entire week at the Senior Bowl, particularly in man coverage, press man coverage, covering some outstanding receivers. He was the best cover guy the entire week. I think he made an impression. Kind of be surprised if he's still there at 129. If he is, be a great value pick for the Seahawks. And then in both these scenarios, as you'll see as well, I went wide receiver in the 7th round because I think there's depth there. Tyler Vaughns is a guy who played 4 years at USC, really experienced. Good size, good speed, good movement skills, good ball skills. Kind of guy you could really see fitting into that hybrid Rams type offense that Shane Waldron's going to incorporate into the Seahawks offense. All right, let's take a look at another scenario, just to give you an idea of what could be there. And in this one, I took Miners because he was there. Again, he's a guy that a lot of people think would really fit in Seattle if he makes it to 56. And then at 129, I went with a small school corner. Only played 1 year, not as much as known about this guy, not as much tape, not as much time with eyeballs on him. Robert Rochelle out of Central Arkansas. He does fit the Seahawks specs. I think he's barely 6 foot, but he's got the long arms, long wingspan. Really shows some man cover skills. Might not be quite ready to play as early as Keith Taylor, but I think they're similar prospects. And then the 7th round, Austin Watkins, wide receiver out of UAB. So 2 similar scenarios, right? It just gives you an idea that you can still get value out of this draft. I think the fact that they only have 3 picks had a couple of effects. I think it forced the Seahawks into using the free agency market more than they normally do. They didn't care at all about the comp pick formula this year. You know, they've played that game in the past. They didn't care at all. They're not going to get any comp picks from this offseason with free agents they lost. They don't care. They wanted to compete. They wanted to advance this roster and improve it and give them a chance to compete against the Rams and the 49ers and the Cardinals in the NFC West. I think they've done that. I think they have fewer glaring holes today on April 8th, 2021 than they normally have on April 8th. So usually we go into these drafts with 9, 10, 11 picks, and the needs are all over the place. And there's a lot of debate. Well, we think they need a receiver more. They need a running back. They need alignment. And they need They've really solidified a lot of the spots on the roster. I think these three positions, wide receiver, corner, center, would bring the most value. And I think it's going to be a different approach this year. I hope it is. Because John Schneider usually goes into the draft looking for upside and future value. We saw that in the last couple of drafts, right? Guys like Colby Parkinson, they weren't going to play much as rookies, even if the injury hadn't kind of derailed him early on. Cody Barton, Marquise Blair, Ugo Amadi. These are guys, they love their athletic profile. They love what they had on tape. They weren't counting on them to play as rookies. They were drafted for their upside, their future upside. Sometimes they're drafting guys more for their special teams acumen. DJ Dallas, a good example. Ben Burr-Kirven, although I think Kirven can play. But he was drafted primarily for depth and for his special team skill. This year, those first two picks, 56 and 129, they need to be guys that can play as rookies. Ideally, the 56th pick needs to be a starter. And so it'll be interesting to see. You know, we get frustrated as Seahawk fans and people who cover the team a little more closely. I certainly do, because every time they come up on the clock or they're about to, what do? You immediately formulate in your head, okay, here are the guys that I want. Here are the guys I like, and here's who I want them to take. And you're also kind of generally aware of here's who the consensus would want them to take or expect them to take. And whoever's calling the pick walks up to the podium and the mouse starts to move and you're zeroed in on them, and they never say the name that you want them to say. They always surprise you, and then we have to scramble to figure out how that puzzle piece fits into what they're trying to do. I wonder if this year will be different. Because the picks are so limited, you have to get value out of this draft. And Schneider's had some really poor drafts the last 5-6 years, where he's taken 10, 11 guys and only one's left on the roster. If you can get 2 solid players out of this draft, it's a win. And it could lead to a lot more wins on the field. So I wonder if that'll change the approach. Maybe he'll be less likely to move back, because he needs to make sure that guy at 56 is a contributing player. Now, they could flip these. If there's a corner at 56, if a Paulson Adebo or a guy that they think can play day one is there, and they think they can still get a guy at 129 at center, or they think they're okay at center, or maybe they go and they sign a guy post June 1 or a camp cut. That guy's, they can't miss. The margin for error when you have 11 picks is a lot greater. It makes draft day fun. All right. First round is going to be kind of boring this year. And so is day 2. And so is day 3. It's usually Seahawk time. But I think these 2 scenarios kind of give you an idea that you can still get value, and they have to get value. I hope you get value out of listening to the show and watching the show. That was so corny, but I'm going with it. Appreciate you joining me. Again, if you're on the YouTube channel, please subscribe. Then you'll get notifications of when there are new shows. And then also as a podcast, if you're not listening or watching this live, you're listening on a podcast network, Spotify, Apple, Podbean, Stitcher, whatever. Please hit follow or subscribe, whatever it is. They're all kind of different. And then you'll know the second that I post a new episode. Also, if you are watching live, remember you can comment and we can include your comments, get some interaction here on the show. Always follow me at Twitter at Seahawks Forever if you're not already. And we'll see you next week. We're going to talk more draft as we get closer. I'm probably going to have a draft guest on next week, a couple of different guys that I'm working with. So I will surprise you with that. But as always, stay safe and go Hawks, go Mariners, go Cougs. Thanks for listening to the Emerald City Sportscast. Let's get some music on. Thanks again. I'm Dan. See you next week.